Okay, so today we're diving into this really fascinating story, a real clash of personalities and, well, criminal styles in the American underworld.
Yeah, we're looking at two huge figures who came up during Prohibition. Their paths crossed, they worked together, but ultimately, their rivalry shaped organized crime as we kind of know it.
And it even seeped into, popular culture, which is always interesting. It's a power struggle with some pretty far-reaching consequences.
What's really striking is how they came from such similar places, immigrant backgrounds, but ended up taking such fundamentally different routes through that whole violent landscape of early 20th century crime.
Right, different philosophies almost.
Yeah, leading to collaboration at times, but then this really significant rivalry later on.
Okay, let's set the scene a bit. Where did they start?
Well, you've got one born in Calabria, Italy, 1891, comes over to the U.S. in 1895, settles in
He
Manhattan.
gets involved pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah, straight into the 5 Points gang.
Hmm.
By 1918, he's already got, a rap sheet, assault, robbery, weapons charges,
In the
and
works.
the other guy, born a bit later, 1897, in Naples, arrives in Little Italy around 1913, and he also has an early run-in, an arrest for having an illegal firearm when he was still pretty young.
So similar starts in some ways, but you mentioned different paths early on.
Well, yeah, the first guy, the Calabrian, he actually does some jail time around 1919, and supposedly after that, he vows to give up violence, says he wants to use his brains instead.
Hmm. Interesting. A strategic shift, maybe? Or a real change of heart?
That's the question, isn't it? Because around the same time, the other fellow, the Neapolitan, he's rising fast in bootlegging, and there are whispers, suggestions that he was involved in a pretty major murder early in his prohibition career.
So one's supposedly stepping away from violence, at least outwardly, while the other seems to be leaning into it more.
It certainly looks that way from the start. It kind of sets the stage for their later differences, their contrasting
And
styles.
then prohibition hits full force. That must have been the game changer.
Absolutely. Suddenly, there's this huge illegal market for alcohol. Massive opportunity. Both men jumped right in, working under Joe the Boss Masseria, big time bootlegging operations.
And they weren't doing this in isolation, right? They were working with others.
No, definitely not. They hooked up with guys like Lucky Luciano, Arnold Rothstein, really influential figures even back
And
then.
wasn't there that thing called the Combine?
Exactly. They even formed alliances with Irish gangs. That showed, a pragmatic side. It wasn't just about Italian gangs sticking together, it was business, crossing ethnic lines to make money.
A sign of things to come, maybe.
Mhm.
More organized, less tribal.
I think so. It showed a move towards broader, more commercially focused criminal enterprises, but it wasn't smooth sailing.
Oh.
Well, one of them got arrested for trying to bribe a Coast Guardsman, and when his associate got convicted, it apparently kicked off a bit of a gang war.
So setbacks were part of the game, too.
Definitely. He apparently lost some operations in that fight, but his overall influence, it seems, just kept growing. By the late 20s, he'd built these really key alliances. Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, even Johnny Torrio out of Chicago.
Wow. So they're really building the foundations of something bigger.
You could say that. Brick by bloody brick, maybe? And all this maneuvering sets the stage for the next big conflict.
The Castellamarese War.
That's the one. A really brutal fight between their boss, Masseria, and this other major player, Salvatore Maranzano.
And where did our two guys fit into this? Still loyal to Masseria.
Well, that's what's fascinating. On the surface, yes, but it looks like they were playing a very strategic game. They seem to understand Masseria's limitations, his sort of old world approach.
And they saw an opportunity for something different, more modern.
It seems that way. Their involvement in the plot to eventually eliminate Masseria points to that. It was ruthless, but definitely forward-thinking in terms of consolidating power.
But they didn't stop there, did they? Maranzano tried to set himself up as the top boss.
He did, the boss of all bosses, but they likely saw that as just another recipe for conflict, unsustainable. So they were also instrumental in taking him out, too.
A bold move, basically ending the war on their own terms.
Pretty much. It cleared the way for a whole new structure for organized crime in America. Were they just power hungry? Or did they genuinely think they were creating something more, I don't know, stable, even if it was criminal?
And this new structure was the Commission.
Exactly, like a board of directors for the mob. Luciano effectively became the CEO, you could say, and our two figures played key roles. One became Luciano's consigliere, his top advisor, huge influence.
And the other?
He became the underboss, more involved in the day-to-day running of things. It was a big shift away from that old single dictator model.
Trying to avoid another war, presumably.
That was the idea. Decentralize things a bit, make it less about one guy's ego. But even though they worked together setting this up, their own ambitions and, frankly, their styles started pulling them in different directions.
Right, this is where their paths really diverge. How so?
Well, the conciliere figure, he starts focusing on things like slot machines, apparently even cut a deal with the governor of Louisiana for that, bookmaking too, and later he gets into legitimate businesses, poultry, meat packing.
Trying to clean things up a bit.
Seems like it. And notably, he stayed away from narcotics. Big time.
But the underboss didn't.
No. He went heavily into the drug trade, and he also developed these strange connections with fascist Italy back then, a very different operational choice.
Wow. That's a huge difference. Gambling versus narcotics. One seems almost quasi-legitimate in some circles, the other much darker.
It really speaks to their different visions, one aiming for maybe a bit more public acceptance or at least tolerance, the other willing to take on the higher risks and maybe higher profits of the drug trade. And those fascist ties add another layer entirely.
Then things got very public with the Kefauver Committee hearings in the 50s.
Oh yeah, a huge moment.
Right.
And the conciliar figure, he testified, but in this really theatrical way, they only showed his hands on TV.
I remember hearing about that. And didn't he say something memorable?
He did. When asked about his finances, he just said, paid my tax, became instantly famous, but then he walked out.
Rocked out?
Yep. Led to contempt charges, more legal trouble. It was this weird mix of defiance and ultimately inability to escape the law. A performance, really.
And wasn't there that other strange detail around that time? About him seeing a psychiatrist?
Yes. That came out, and in that world at that time, it was seen as a massive humiliation, a sign of weakness. It really highlighted the gap opening up between them.
So one's trying to manage this public image, however awkwardly, while the other's still operating more traditionally, maybe more ruthlessly, in the shadows.
Pretty much sums it up. And these diverging paths, public and private, just cranked up the tension that was already there. It was building towards something.
And that something arrived after World War II?
It did. The underboss figure, he comes back from Italy, and he's got ambitions. He wants the top spot. He feels it's rightfully his.
But the consigliere is effectively running the show by then, even with Luciano technically still around but facing his own issues.
Right, and he wasn't about to just hand over control. So you have this classic standoff, Power Struggle 101, but with much higher and more violent stakes.
It couldn't have ended well.
It escalated.
Yeah.
The friction became open conflict, culminating in that dramatic assassination attempt. The sitting boss, the conciliere figure, gets shot in the head.
Shot in the head. How did he survive?
Amazingly, it was a superficial wound, more of a graze, really. But the message was crystal clear. It was the underboss making his move through an associate.
That's incredible. What happened next? Did he retaliate? Did he name the shooter?
That's the truly astonishing part. He survived, recovers, and refuses to identify his attacker to the police, just sticks to the code, omerta.
Oh.
And then, even more surprisingly, he basically agrees to step down. He cedes control of the crime family to the guy who just tried to kill him.
Why? Why would he do that after surviving?
It had to be pragmatic. Maybe he saw a long, bloody war coming that would destroy everything. Maybe he figured stepping down was the only way to keep his other interests safe, especially his gambling rackets. He basically traded the top job for his remaining business portfolio.
So one guy gets the top job, the other steps aside but keeps his money.
In essence, yeah. The conciliar figure enters this kind of semi-retirement, still very influential, an advisor. They even nicknamed him the Prime Minister of the Underworld.
Prime Minister, that's something.
Isn't it? And apparently he got really into, of all things, horticulture. Gardening.
Seriously, from mob boss to gardener.
Stranger things have happened, I suppose. Meanwhile, the other guy, the one who ordered the hit, he finally becomes the boss.
But his reign wasn't very long, was it?
No, relatively brief.
Mm.
His continued focus on narcotics, the thing the prime minister avoided, proved to be his undoing. He eventually got nailed on drug charges.
And ended up.
A long prison sentence. He died behind bars. A very different end compared to the prime minister.
Who died?
Peacefully. Natural causes. Quite old. A real rarity for someone at that level in that world.
It's such a stark contrast in their fates. One lives long, influences from the sidelines, even inspires fictional characters.
Right. He was a major inspiration for Vito Corleone in The Godfather, and he pops up in TV shows too. His story really lodged itself in the public imagination.
While the other achieves the ultimate power, but it destroys him in the end.
Exactly. Their whole rivalry, you could argue, was about these two competing philosophies. The prime minister's approach was maybe more businesslike, seeking that veneer of legitimacy, avoiding the highest risk stuff like drugs.
While the other guy stuck to the more traditional, maybe more brutal path.
Hmm.
Narcotics, violence, ultimate control being the goal.
That seems to be the crux of it. Different ways of navigating that incredibly dangerous world.
So we've traced these two incredible lives, rise together, collaborated, then this bitter split, assassination attempt, and these completely opposite endings. One becomes this almost mythical figure living to old age, the other flames out after reaching the top.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? Considering everything their strategies, how long they lasted, their influence, how they died, who actually won. Was it the guy who lived long and became a legend, or the one who briefly grasped that ultimate power before falling? It's a tough question about ambition, power, and, well, survival in the shadows.